A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs he was performing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. The Jewish feast of Passover was near. When Jesus raised his eyes and saw that a large crowd had gathered around him, he said to Philip, "Where can we buy enough food for them to eat?" He said this to test him, because he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 200 days' wages worth of food would not be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good are these for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people recline." Now there was a great deal of grass in that place. So the men reclined, about 5,000 in number. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining, and also as much of the fish as they wanted. When they had had their fill, he said to his disciples, "Gather the fragments left over, so nothing will be wasted." So they collected them and filled 12 wicker baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves. That had been more than they could eat. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is truly the prophet, the one who is to come into the world." Since Jesus knew they were going to come and carry him off to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain alone. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. My dear sisters and brothers, there is so much in our lives that we take for granted. We fail to realize how precious and valuable they are until one day they are taken from us. Then everyone scrambles for the pieces. As a Palestinian Jew, Jesus was raised in a faith tradition that hallowed everyday things like bread and wine because they were appreciated as gifts from God. Food was a sacred thing, and the law required people to say a prayer of thanks every time they had finished eating. The rabbis taught that a meal without a prayer was a meal that was cursed. In the culture in which Jesus grew up, bread was the essential basic food, and to eat or break bread was to have a meal. In today's gospel, we see Jesus blessing bread, and in doing so, he works a miracle. We are all very familiar with the miracle of the multiplication of loaves. A large crowd of people impressed by the wonders of Jesus healing people, has followed him into the hills on the far side of the lake. When Jesus sees droves of people who need to be fed, he turns to Philip for help. But Andrew, another disciple, in the meantime, spots a small boy with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. However, this poor boy's lunch does not seem to appear to the disciples to be much of a resource. But what the disciples have to learn is that Jesus is not only resourceful, he is himself the resource. With Jesus as the resource, the poor boy's lunch seems to be enough to satisfy the hunger of so many people. Shortage becomes abundance, deficiency becomes plenty, and nothing is lost of what has been given to him. The gospel today does not say that the crowds are actually looking to Jesus to feed them. But then Jesus sees no problem because he knows what he is going to do. However, he wants to know how his disciples would handle this particular situation. 5 loaves and 2 fish. But it is so little among so many. Jesus does not say in this situation, you know what? We can't do this. Let's just forget about it. Instead, he says, bring the 5 loaves and the 2 fish to me. So, somewhat embarrassed, the disciples hold up a few loaves and fish before him and shrug their shoulders. Jesus takes the bread and the fish and blesses the little they have to offer and gives it to the disciples to be distributed to the people. In the end, they have enough to eat with leftovers. What Jesus, dear friends, is trying to tell us is through this, what is he trying to tell us through this familiar miracle? A few things. One is that this miracle is a sign that would point to the Eucharist. Jesus is indeed the bread of life, and therefore he alone can satisfy all of our hungers. Secondly, there is the generosity of the boy who was willing to sacrifice his lunch for the sake of others. And thirdly, even if your gift is small, Jesus will make it grow. Let me reflect with you on that last point for a minute. What is Jesus trying to tell us here? He tells us to bring our own insignificant 5 loaves and 2 fish and not to back off. Don't we at times act like Philip and Andrew in today's gospel? Don't we respond the same way when we are overwhelmed by situations and circumstances that we find ourselves in? That is when, dear friends, we need to listen to the voice of Jesus. Don't say, but it's so little, what can we do? I know the problems are great and your resources are few, But don't give up. Bring them to me to be blessed. That what can we do with our so little? Perhaps is the cry that might be the response of the parents who today are worried about their children. In their young lives, there are so many negative influences. Parents, worried and anxious and looking for answers, ask, what are we to do? We have nothing here. We feel so helpless. Just 5 loaves and 2 fish. Or that might be the response of someone who is trying to make an honest living. But the pressures to cut corners and the politics involved saps his or her energy and spirits. They are hungry for answers about how they can live a life of fidelity to the teachings of Jesus in the workplace. They feel that others, those about them, have all the power and they have nothing, and there is nothing they can do. Or that's how we feel about our relationships with family and friends. We feel, especially with our families, the spark has gone out for whatever reason. There is very little left in it. Just 5 loaves and 2 fish. What can I do? The lesson, dear friends, for those of us who feel that we are stuck with 5 loaves and 2 fish in the face of overwhelming hunger and helplessness, is not to forget that we have someone who tells us, bring your strengths and limitations, your doubts and fears, your past and your future to me. Bring what little you have, and I will make them adequate for the task at hand. Bring your hopes and dreams, your burdens and challenges, your responsibilities and your pain and your disappointments to me. You see, when the life gets the best of us, it is often because we focus too much on how little we can do and too little on how much Christ can do. But let's not forget that in the end, God will have the last word. When all the anxieties have passed, the worries have gone, and the crosses have disappeared, one thing will remain, namely God's constant love and presence. I think that should be enough for us.